Well, it says probably that a lot of people are concerned about the economy and what's going to happen with inflation and with the eventual impact of the tariffs that haven't already hit. So consumers and some businesses are looking out and thinking, I'm just not so sure I want to spend that money yet. And so they're waiting to the last minute to book. And as you said, that in turn is making it really difficult for the airlines to plan capacity in the fourth quarter of the year.
Okay, but it's making planning difficult. But couldn't it potentially be good for the airlines? Because I feel like if you book a last minute flight, it's way more expensive. How do you square that?
It depends. Some last-minute flights are cheaper because if the airline realizes they're not going to sell them, rather than hold out for a higher fare, then they'll discount them and sell them for less, and at least they don't fly an empty seat. That's one of the most costly things you can do, is to fly an empty seat on a plane.
This is totally off topic, but I'm going to ask you about it, Mary, because you are a wealth of knowledge when it comes to airlines, and I love talking airlines. I took a flight last week, and I was booked in coach, as I always am when I travel on my own, because I buy the ticket myself. And it was a really short flight. It was here to Buffalo, and they sent me an offer. I could upgrade to first class or whatever, that business class or whatever, for it was like $49 or $59. It was really cheap. And one thing that I noticed about that is less than the cost of the 2 bags that you get to check for free if you actually, are flying coach and are checking 2 bags. And I was thinking, if I wasn't checking any bags, but I was thinking if I was checking a bag, it would totally make sense for me to buy this. Why are they selling these at such cheap prices for that route?
Well, if they have the seats available, what they're doing is also building brand loyalty. That's one of the most important things for airlines these days, is to build brand loyalty. So if they have a seat that they could put you in, give you an upgrade, give it to you at a reasonable cost that you're likely to pay, then why not do that? And they make money off of the seat, right? And then they perhaps build a little bit of loyalty with you, or convince you that you want to travel in that upgraded seat going forward, and pay them more money then.
Look, I'll be honest. I was traveling on an airline where I have absolutely zero status, and they ended up upgrading me anyway for this flight. It was like 45 minutes or 50 minutes, and I felt, hey, that was really nice. I felt good, and I know it was just a computer that did it.
Mary, how have the airlines been doing with loyalty? What is your reporting showing? Are people getting more loyal to airlines?
Yeah, the airlines, especially the big airlines, are just booming when it comes to loyalty. Every quarter they talk about that they're having record numbers of people sign up for their credit cards, record numbers of people joining their loyalty programs. And then the amount of money that they get back from the credit card issuers is in the billions and billions of dollars, and it's growing. I think Delta this year expects to get $8 billion more than they make off of flying through their credit card loyalty program.
That's pretty amazing. Okay, I want to get back to the story that you wrote here. As I mentioned, it is among the most read, and I know we can ask you anything about airlines, so we definitely appreciate that. As Emily was talking about, this idea of waiting to the last minute typically tells us that, an airline can actually charge more. When it comes to how these airlines are planning routes, how often are they adjusting capacity? Because you said that this is for the fourth quarter of the year. How do airlines change their routes, change their capacity at any given moment in the fiscal year?
They do a lot of planning ahead of time because it's not always easy or inexpensive to change your capacity, especially when you're talking about a whole quarter. And the number of flights that the airlines operate, especially the big ones, every single day. Some of the smaller airlines that are a little bit more nimble, they can change their capacity a little bit faster. The big airlines, one thing they can do is they could put a smaller jet or a bigger jet on a route than they had originally planned. That's pretty easy to do if they've got the plane available, and that can affect the economics of that whole flight.
Your headline, I think Tim read it at the beginning of the segment, but I'm going to read it again. Last minute flight bookings set up, quote, nail biter for U.S. airlines. Did one airline stand out as biting its nails the most, given this trend of last-minute bookings?
So what that's in reference to is the airline capacity planning for the fourth quarter and the uncertainty about demand. because a lot of the analysts believe there's already too much capacity in the market. The airlines need to start pulling down that capacity before the fourth quarter. And the reason they want to do that is because if they've got too many seats in the market, then they have to discount fares often to fill the planes. So if they can match demand and supply, they can raise the fares. If they have too many flights out there, too many seats, and there's not enough people to fill them, then they end up discounting. That's part of what happened earlier last year. The airlines got serious about it. They started cutting capacity, and then in the fourth quarter, they had great results in the fourth quarter. And it kind of set them up for a good start to 2025 that quickly disappeared once the year started.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. And that's where I want to end, because if we were talking 3 months ago, we'd be talking about the uncertainty that these airlines face. Then, at the end of the second quarter, as we reported, and as they reported earnings for the end of the second quarter going into the third quarter, everything kind of seemed fine. It was uncertainty from Liberation Day kind of gone. What's going on?
Right. It was really weird. We had that initial, the start of the year early when Trump started talking about tariffs and trade wars, and it really spooked a lot of people. And they either canceled flight plans or they just decided not to book anything. And so for a while, it looked really bleak for the airlines. I know Southwest was talking about that demand was 6 points below what they had expected for the rest of the year. It had already fallen 6 points. And so the airlines were just really hit hard by that. And then suddenly, at the end of June, everything just suddenly went up. Everybody was wanting to fly. Everybody was paying good prices to fly. And so it was kind of an unexpected upturn for the airlines. Now there's real uncertainty about the fourth quarter. The third quarter, they did book a lot of seats at lower fares. So we'll have to see. I think it's just expected to be a so-so quarter financially.